Hello, welcome to the Heartbreak Stories channel. Today's story is about a man who built everything from the ground up: his career, his home, his marriage. What makes this story different is not just the betrayal, but who was behind it and how far that went.
I fired him for being a snake. 2 years later, he had his hands all over my wife like I didn't exist. That was his first mistake. His second was thinking I'd walk away quietly. I don't walk away. I document, I plan, and I make sure every lie has a price tag attached to it. My name is Clayton Merritt. I'm 44 years old, and for the last 11 years I've worked as a regional manager for Caldwell Construction out of Columbus, Ohio. I oversee 6 active job sites, manage contracts, handle subcontractors, and make the calls that keep projects on schedule and under budget. If a crew isn't pulling its weight, I'm the one who has that conversation. I've never enjoyed firing people, but I've never lost sleep over it either, not when it's earned. I met Naomi at a friend's cookout in the summer of 2010. She had this way of laughing with her whole body, shoulders shaking, head thrown back, completely unguarded. I thought she was the most alive person I'd ever seen. We dated for 2 years, married in a small ceremony outside Dayton, bought a house in Westerville, got a rescue mutt named Bruno who immediately claimed the couch as his own. We built something real, or so I believed. The distance crept in a way it always does, quietly, disguised as normal life. Longer hours for me, a new circle of friends for her, conversations that stopped going anywhere. I noticed it, but told myself it was just a season. Every marriage has them. I kept showing up, kept trying. Date nights that felt like job interviews. Flowers she'd acknowledge with a polite thanks and forget by morning. She told me I was smothering her, so I gave her space. Looking back, I handed her a shovel and called it breathing room. I should have trusted what my gut had been telling me for months. That Tuesday, I left the Glenbrook site early. One of my foremen had flagged a concrete delivery issue, and I'd handled it by phone, which meant I was on Route 9 headed home by 4:30 instead of 6. Bruno needed his evening walk, and Naomi had said she'd be working late. Some extended project meeting she'd texted that morning. I missed my exit. Not distracted, not tired. Just missed it the way you sometimes do when your mind is already somewhere else. I looped around through the Riverside neighborhood, cutting back toward Westerville on Morse Road. That's when I saw her car. A white Subaru Outback with a small dent in the rear bumper I'd been meaning to fix for a year, parked in front of a brick 2-story on Garfield Terrace I'd never seen before. I pulled over and sat there with the engine running. I knew the address. Not because I'd been there, because I'd seen it in a screenshot I wasn't supposed to see 3 weeks earlier. A calendar notification that popped up when Naomi's phone lit up on the kitchen table. She grabbed it fast. I told myself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. I turned off the engine, sat for maybe 4 minutes. Then I got out. The front porch light was on. The door opened before I reached the end of the front walk, and there was Naomi, laughing at something over her shoulder, wearing the blue cardigan I'd given her for her birthday. She looked relaxed, happy even, the kind of happy she hadn't looked around me in a long time. Then he followed her out. Derek Payne, 38 years old, broad shoulders, the practiced ease of a man who thinks the world owes him a favorable outcome. I recognized him the same instant my stomach turned to stone. Derek had worked under me at Caldwell for 14 months before I terminated his contract 2 years ago. Chronic lateness, 2 safety violations, and a habit of undermining junior crew members to make himself look better. He'd taken the firing personally. Told one of my foremen I'd regret it. I suppose this was his version of collecting. Naomi saw me first. Her laughter died. Derek hadn't noticed me yet. He stepped up behind her and put both hands on her shoulders, casual, familiar, like he'd done it 100 times. Like I wasn't standing 15 feet away on the public sidewalk. He put his hands on my wife like I wasn't even there. I walked toward them at a steady pace. Derek looked up then, and I watched the confidence drain out of his face 1 degree at a time as he registered who I was. He dropped his hands. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Derek. I let his name sit in the air like a bill come due. Then I looked at Naomi. I'd like you to explain this. She didn't apologize. She didn't reach for me. She pulled the cardigan tighter across her chest and said, flatly, "You weren't supposed to be here." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, this isn't what it looks like. Just, you weren't supposed to be here. Like the problem was my timing. Derek cleared his throat and took one step forward. Hey man, maybe you should. Don't. One word. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just looked at him until he stopped talking. Then I looked back at Naomi. How long? She glanced at Derek. He looked at the porch boards. Clayton, she started. How long, Naomi? She pressed her lips together and then, almost quietly, said, 8 months. 8 months. I did the math fast, and it landed like a pallet of concrete off a loading dock. 8 months ago, we were still going to church on Sundays. 8 months ago, I took her to Hilton Head for our anniversary. I stood there for a moment and reminded them both exactly who they were dealing with. Not with a speech, not with rage, but with the stillness of a man who has already made his decision. Derek couldn't hold my gaze. Naomi looked somewhere past my shoulder. Then I turned and walked back to my truck. Bruno was waiting at the window when I got home. He pressed his broad head against my knee the moment I sat on the floor of the entryway, and I put both hands in his fur and didn't move for a long time. That was the last quiet moment for a while. I drove home on autopilot that night. Didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone. Just watched the road and let my mind run through the math of 8 months the way I'd run through a budget, line by line, date by date, looking for where the numbers stopped adding up. Bruno was already asleep by the time I heard Naomi's car in the driveway. I didn't move from the kitchen table. I just sat there with a glass of water I hadn't touched and waited. She came in through the side door, keys jingling, and stopped when she saw me. We need to talk, I said. She set her bag down slowly. Clayton, sit down, Naomi. She sat, and for a moment, she looked like the woman I married, uncertain, a little soft around the edges. Then she straightened her back and the mask came back up. I know what you're going to say, she began. Then save us both some time and don't make me drag it out of you. I kept my voice even. Derek Payne, 8 months. Walls don't I know. She looked at the table. That's most of it. Most of it, I repeated. So there's more. She exhaled slowly. It started before the summer. It wasn't planned, it just... Don't. I held up one hand. Don't tell me it just happened. Parking your car at his house doesn't just happen. Wearing my gift to his porch doesn't just happen. That landed. She glanced down at the cardigan, and for the first time something close to shame moved across her face. You knew who he was? I pressed. You knew I fired him. You knew exactly what kind of man he is. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was quieter. He was different with me. I almost laughed. He got fired for cutting corners on a job site and intimidating the guys under him. That's not a personality someone switches off for the right woman. Naomi. That's who he is. She folded her hands on the table. I'm not going to sit here and defend him to you. Then defend yourself. Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me what I missed. You didn't do anything wrong. She said it like it was supposed to be a comfort. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? She was quiet for a long moment, eyes somewhere past my shoulder. Then, I stopped feeling like a priority. I stopped feeling like you actually saw me. I sat with that. Let's settle. Because part of me, the part that had been lying awake at night for months, recognized something in those words. And part of me knew she was using a real feeling as a cover story for a choice she'd already made long before she bothered to say any of this to me. You could have told me that, I said finally. You could have said those exact words 6 months ago, and I would have listened. But you didn't come to me. You went to him. And not just any him. The man who spent 14 months trying to undermine my job and left my site threatening to get even. Her jaw tightened. I didn't know about that. You knew I fired him for cause. You knew I didn't speak highly of him. That's enough. She stood up, moved to the counter, arms crossed. So what now? You want me to beg? You want an apology you can hold over me? I stood up too. I want the truth for once. That's all I ever wanted. She turned to face me, and her expression shifted, cooler, more controlled. The version of Naomi that knew how to manage a room. The truth is this marriage stopped working a long time ago. I didn't handle it right. I know that. But you need to accept that we're not the same people who got married and dating. No, I agreed quietly. We're not. Because one of us changed without telling the other. She didn't have an answer for that. I walked to the back door and let Bruno out into the yard. Stood on the deck and watched him nose around the edge of the fence in the dark. The air smelled like cut grass and coming rain. Behind me, I heard Naomi go upstairs. No more words, no more attempts. I stayed on that deck for a long time. When I came back inside, I went straight to the desk in the spare room and opened my laptop. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast. What I felt instead was cold and clear and deliberate. I opened the shared cloud account we use for household documents, the one she hadn't thought to change the password on, and I started reading. Why I found there changed everything. This wasn't a stumble. This was a system. I've managed construction projects long enough to know that the most dangerous problems are the ones that look minor on the surface. A hairline fracture in a load-bearing wall. A contractor who files clean reports but never quite finishes on time. You learn to document everything, because the day you need proof is never the day you expect it. That instinct saved me. I spent the early morning hours at the spare room desk with a legal pad and my laptop, building what I mentally called the file. Bank statements first. I had access to all our joint accounts, and what I found made my jaw tighten. Recurring transfers, small enough not to trigger a conversation, large enough to add up fast. Over 8 months, just under $4,000 had moved from our joint savings into an account I didn't recognize. The transfers were labeled personal expenses. Then the cloud drive. Naomi used it for everything. Grocery lists, home warranty documents, her sister's birthday reminders. She'd also used it, apparently, to store a folder she'd named Client Notes, which contained no clients and no notes. What it did contain were screenshots of text conversations, hotel confirmations, and a shared Google Calendar that wasn't our shared Google Calendar. I photographed every screen with my phone. Then I emailed the most critical files to a separate account I created that morning using a name she wouldn't recognize. At 6:15, I heard her moving around upstairs. I closed the laptop and made coffee. When she came downstairs, I was standing at the counter with a mug, already dressed. She slowed when she saw me. "You sleep at all?" "Enough," I replied. "Sit down. I have a few more questions." She poured herself coffee and sat at the table, watching me carefully. I could see her measuring the room the way she always did before a difficult conversation, deciding how much to give, how much to hold back. I set my phone face up on the table between us, open to a screenshot of the hidden calendar. Her eyes went to it and stayed there. "Client Notes folder," I said. "Nice touch." She didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, "How long have you had that?" "Since about 2 this morning." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. $4,000, Naomi. 8 months of hotel rooms. Dinners. One weekend in Nashville that you told me was your sister's bachelorette. Her hands tightened around the mug. "Here's what I want to know," I continued, keeping my voice steady and low. "Did you know, when this started, that Derek had threatened to get back at me after I let him go? Did he tell you that?" She looked up then, and the answer was in her face before she opened her mouth. "He mentioned you weren't exactly fair to him," she said carefully. Something went cold in my chest. "He told you I wronged him, and you believe that." "I didn't think." "You didn't think?" I cut in where you didn't want to think. "Because those are two very different things." She set down her mug. "Clayton, whatever Derek's motives were, what I felt was real. I wasn't a pawn in some grudge match. Maybe not intentionally." I stood up and picked up my phone. "But you handed him exactly what he wanted, and you paid for it out of our savings account." She flinched at that. I walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want a straight answer. Is there anything else I don't know? Any other accounts? Any other arrangements I'm going to find when I keep looking?" She was quiet for several seconds. "Then, no." I nodded once. "Good, because I'm going to keep looking." I drove to the office and spent the morning focused on the Glenberg site reports, because work doesn't stop because your life falls apart, and because staying busy kept the cold thing in my chest from spreading. At noon, I called Owen Burke, my oldest friend, and told him I needed to meet that evening. Owen showed up at my place at 7 with a six-pack and no questions until I was ready. I laid it all out: the discovery, the confrontation, Derek Payne, the money, the calendar. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things that makes Owen Owen. When I finished, he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "What are you going to do?" "I've already started," I said. "About everything documented. I'm calling a lawyer tomorrow." He nodded slowly. You need anything from me? Not yet, but I will. Bruno jumped up beside me on the couch and settled his weight against my leg. Owen looked at him, then back at me. You doing okay? I thought about it honestly. I'm functioning. That's enough for now. He stayed for 2 hours. We didn't talk about Naomi the whole time. We talked about the Bengals, a job site problem I'd been turning over, his daughter's college applications. Normal things. Necessary things. When he left, I sat alone in the quiet house and felt the shape of what was coming. Not with dread, with the kind of focus I bring to a project that has no margin for error. I had work to do. The lawyer's name was Patricia Holt, referred by a colleague who'd been through a divorce 3 years earlier and come out standing. She had an office on North High Street, a firm handshake, and the manner of someone who had heard every variation of this story and still took each one seriously. I sat across from her on Wednesday morning and set a manila folder on her desk. She opened it, scanned the first few pages, and looked up. You put this together last night. 2 nights ago and yesterday, I said. I wanted to come in with something concrete. She turned a few more pages. This is thorough. Bank transfers, time-stamped calendar entries, the hotel confirmations. She paused at the Nashville receipt. All from jointly accessible accounts. Every one. She closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. Mr. Merritt, based on what you've brought me, you're in a strong position. The financial transfers complicate things for her significantly. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, but documentation of this kind of expenditure matters. We spent 90 minutes going through specifics. The house, in both our names, purchased 6 years ago. The joint savings. My pension through Caldwell. Her part-time consulting income she'd never fully disclosed. By the time I left, the process had officially begun. I drove home feeling something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not happiness, not closure, just the clean sensation of a decision made and locked in. Naomi was working from home that afternoon. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop when I came in, and she looked up with an expression I couldn't quite read. Cautious, maybe, waiting to see which version of me had walked through the door. I set a sealed envelope on the counter beside her. She looked at it without touching it. What is that? Open it, I said. She did. Her eyes moved across the first page slowly, then faster. When she looked up, something in her face had shifted, not the controlled composure I'd been dealing with for days, but something rawer underneath it. You filed already, she said. I retained an attorney this morning. She stood up from the table. Clayton, we haven't talked about whether this is what we both want. I know what I want. I kept my voice level, and I know what you chose. Those two things don't leave a lot of room for a different conversation. She set the papers down. So that's it. You're just done. Naomi. I looked at her steadily. You spent 8 months for $1,000 and every free Tuesday and Saturday building something with a man who took that job specifically because of his grudge against me. You had a second calendar, a second account, and a cover story for every weekend. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. A long series of them. Her voice dropped. I told you I wasn't happy. You told me you needed space. That's not the same thing. I picked up my keys from the counter. I'm going to stay at Owen's for a few nights. I'll be back Saturday to get some things. Patricia Holt's contact information is on the second page. You'll want to find your own representation. She stood very still. You planned all of this. I documented the truth and acted on it. I paused at the door. That's what I do. I whistled for Bruno, clipped his leash, and walked out into the afternoon air. Behind me, I heard nothing. No door slam, no called-out word. Just silence. Bruno trotted beside me down the sidewalk, tail moving steadily, completely unbothered by the fact that the world had just changed. Dogs have a gift for that. They live in whatever moment they're in and trust that you know where you're going. I was starting to trust that again, too. I was on site at Glenbrook Friday morning when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 40 minutes later, during a break between contractor walkthroughs, I played it back. Clayton, this is Renee Holloway, Naomi's friend. I know this is out of nowhere, and I understand if you don't want to talk to me. But there are things you should know. Please call me back. I stood beside my truck in the site parking lot and listened to it twice. Renee Holloway. I met her maybe 4 or 5 times over the years, birthday dinners, a 4th of July cookout. Quiet woman, careful with her words. She and Naomi had been close since before I came into the picture. I called her back within the minute. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady but tight, the way people sound when they've been rehearsing something difficult. She asked if we could meet in person somewhere away from the neighborhood. I suggested a coffee shop off Morse Road. I knew she wouldn't normally have reason to visit. She was already there when I arrived, a half-drunk tea in front of her and a manila envelope on the table. I sat down and waited. "I've been going back and forth about this for 2 months," she said. "I want you to know that." "I appreciate you making the call," I replied. She slid the envelope across the table. "I didn't print everything, just what I thought mattered most. The rest I can forward if your attorney needs it." I opened it carefully. Screenshots, text conversations between Renee and Naomi. I scanned the first few and felt the temperature in the room drop. Naomi hadn't just stumbled into Derek Payne. She'd known exactly who he was. There were messages going back 14 months before the affair started, in which she mentioned running into him, then talking to him, then meeting him for coffee. And in one message, dated about 2 weeks before I would have estimated the affair began, Naomi had written, "He's still bitter about Clayton letting him go. Honestly, I get it. Clayton can be cold when he decides someone's done." Renee watched me read. She didn't fill the silence with apologies. She knew about his grievance against me. I said, not looking up. "She knew, and she didn't tell you." Renee wrapped both hands around her mug. "I told her she was playing with fire. I told her twice. She said she could handle it and that it wasn't serious." She paused. Then it became serious, and she asked me to cover for her at a family thing in March. I said no. That's when we stopped talking as much. I set the papers down. "She used you before that, though, as an alibi." Renee nodded. "Just once, but it was enough. A few times. I didn't know what I was covering for. When I figured it out, I stopped." We sat there for a moment. Outside, a light rain had started against the coffee shop window. "Why now?" I asked. She looked at me directly. "Because I found out she's telling people you became controlling after the separation. That you're making her life difficult on purpose." Her jaw tightened slightly, and that didn't sit right with me. "You've never been anything but decent to everyone I've ever seen you interact with." I thanked her, genuinely. She nodded, finished her tea, and left without making it into more than it was. I sat there for another 10 minutes, going back through the messages. Then I texted Patricia Holt and told her I had supplemental documentation she'd want to see. That evening I came home to get Bruno's food and an extra set of clothes. Naomi was upstairs. I could hear her on the phone, voice low, doing what she did best, managing the narrative. I didn't announce myself. I moved through the house quietly, gathered what I needed, and left. In the truck, Bruno settled in the back seat and exhaled the long, satisfied breath of a dog who has no idea what's happening and couldn't care less. I drove toward Owen's place with the rain picking up on the windshield and Renee's envelope on the passenger seat. The picture was complete now. Every angle accounted for. I wasn't angry. I was ready. The dinner was at Forsyth Grill, a downtown Columbus restaurant with good lighting and better steaks. My colleague Dan Whitaker had suggested it for a working dinner. He was overseeing the bidding process on a new mixed-use development near Easton, and he wanted my red on 2 of the subcontractors in the running. I'd worked with both of them before. It was exactly the kind of conversation I was built for. I arrived at 7, shook Dan's hand, and we settled in at a corner table with drinks and the bid documents spread between our plates. The restaurant was maybe 2/3 full, ambient noise low enough to talk business without raising our voices. I was explaining my experience with one of the contractor's safety record when I noticed Dan's eyes flick past my shoulder. I turned. 3 tables away, angled toward the far wall, were Naomi and Derek Payne. They hadn't seen me yet. Naomi was talking, gesturing slightly with her wine glass, and Derek was leaning in the way men do when they want someone to think they're listening. He had one arm stretched across the table toward her, fingers close to her hand. Comfortable. Territorial. I turned back to Dan. "Sorry," I said. "You were saying about the permit timeline." Dan blinked, then recovered. "Right. The county's been running about 6 weeks behind on commercial permits, so..." I listened, asked the right questions, made the right notes. Somewhere in my peripheral vision, I was aware of the moment Naomi finally looked up and scanned the room, the way people do when a conversation has a natural pause. I was looking down at the bid documents when she found me. I didn't react, didn't look up. Dan was mid-sentence about load-bearing specifications, and I gave him my full attention. About 30 seconds later, I glanced up, not toward their table, just generally, and caught it in one clean frame. Derek had clocked me. His posture had shifted. That loose, self-satisfied ease was gone, replaced by something stiffer, more deliberate. He said something to Naomi. She set down her wine glass. I looked back at Dan and asked him a question about the second contractor's bonding history. He answered. We talked for another 40 minutes, finished our steaks, and I ordered coffee. When the check came, I stood, shook Dan's hand, and buttoned my jacket. I didn't approach their table, but I walked past it on the way to the door, and I made it a point to walk slowly. Derek looked at the table. Naomi held my gaze for 1 second, 2, then looked away. I nodded once, not at her, not at him, just the measured acknowledgement of a man who sees everything and owes nothing, and walked out into the night air. Outside, I stood at my truck for a moment and breathed. The rain from earlier had stopped. The street was wet and quiet. My phone buzzed. Owen, you still at dinner? I typed back, just leaving. Derek and Naomi were there. 3 seconds. Then I smiled for the first time in days. And nothing. I had a good steak. I drove home. Not Owen's place, but home, because the house was still mine and I was done letting anyone make me feel like a guest in my own life. Bruno met me at the door like I'd been gone a week. I sat on the kitchen floor with him for a few minutes, let the quiet settle around us. The file was growing. The legal process was moving. And tonight, without raising my voice or changing my expression, I had reminded them both exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. That was enough for one evening. The decision to leave wasn't dramatic. I didn't announce it, didn't pack a bag in front of her, didn't make it into a scene. I simply looked at the house one Sunday morning. The photos still on the walls, Naomi's coffee cup on the counter, the whole carefully maintained surface of a life that had been hollowed out from underneath, and decided I needed to step back from it before it started feeling normal. I loaded Bruno into the truck, threw a duffel bag in the back seat, and drove north. I had a friend from an old job site who owned a fishing cabin outside Sunbury, about 40 minutes from Columbus. He'd offered it to me more than once over the years, said the key was under the mat whenever I needed it. I'd never taken him up on it. I texted him Sunday morning, and he replied in under a minute. It's yours. Stay as long as you want. The cabin was small, practical, exactly what I needed. Pine walls, a wood stove that took some coaxing, a back porch that looked out over a narrow creek running through bare November trees. No television. Spotty cell service. Bruno thought it was the best place he'd ever been in his life and spent the first afternoon investigating every inch of the perimeter at full speed. I turned my phone to silent and left it that way. By Monday evening, Naomi had called 11 times. 3 texts from her mother. 2 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out, when I checked, to be Derek Payne's. I stared at that one for a moment, then set the phone face down on the porch railing and watched the creek. He was calling me now. That told me more than anything Naomi had said in days. I called Patricia Holt on Tuesday morning, gave her a contact number for the cabin, and told her to route anything urgent through that line. She updated me on the filing status. Everything was moving cleanly. The financial documentation had done exactly what she said it would do. Naomi's attorney had responded, and the initial tone, Patricia noted with professional understatement, suggested that Naomi had been advised her position was not strong. I spent the days working with my hands. Cleared brush along the creek bank. Replaced 2 rotted boards on the back porch. Chopped enough firewood to last the cabin 3 winters. Physical work, the kind that empties your head and reminds you what your body is actually for. Evenings I read, cooked simple food, let Bruno sleep across my feet by the wood stove. On Wednesday, I called Owen and told him where I was. How's the reception up there? He asked. Bad enough to be useful, I replied. He laughed. Naomi called me, by the way, yesterday. Said she was worried about you. I waited. I told her you were handling things in your own way and that she should let the attorneys do their jobs. He paused. She didn't love that answer. No, I agreed. She wouldn't. Derek Payne also called me, Owen added, and his voice shifted slightly. Don't ask me how he got my number. He wanted to talk, he said. I told him I had nothing to say to him, and that if he contacted me again, I'd consider it harassment. Something settled in my chest, a quiet, solid satisfaction. Good. Clayton. Owen's tone was serious now. She's starting to tell people things. Mutual friends. The story she's putting out is that you disappeared without warning and she doesn't know where you are. She knows where I am. She knows I'm safe. She just doesn't know the address. I know that. But people who only hear her side don't. I thought about it for a moment. She can say what she wants. The paperwork tells the real story. I stayed at the cabin through Friday. 5 days total. Not a long time, but long enough. Long enough to sleep without the house's particular silence pressing down on me. Long enough for Bruno to look genuinely disappointed when I loaded him back into the truck. Long enough for Naomi's panic, which Owen confirmed had been escalating all week, to show her own people exactly who she was when she didn't have her composure under control. I drove back into Columbus on Saturday morning. The sky was flat and gray, the kind of November sky that doesn't commit to anything. I stopped at the house to drop Bruno's things and pick up a few files I needed, and Naomi was there. She came downstairs when she heard the door and stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She looked tired. Not the polished tired she performed sometimes when she wanted sympathy, but genuinely worn, like she'd been running a script for 5 days straight and had finally run out of lines. I didn't know where you were, she said. I needed space, I replied, setting my keys on the counter. I thought you'd understand that. You're the one who told me I needed to give more of it. She flinched, didn't respond. I picked up the files from the desk, checked on Bruno's water bowl, and headed back to the door. I paused with my hand on the frame. Naomi, whatever you've been telling people this week, Owen, your friends, whoever else, it's going to be measured against the record. You know what that record says. I kept my voice even. Act accordingly. I left her standing in the hallway. Bruno watched me from the couch with the mildly philosophical expression he reserved for moments he didn't fully understand but had decided to trust me on. I gave him a scratch behind the ears and walked out. The silence behind me was hers now. She could do what she wanted with it. The post went up on a Saturday evening. I found out about it from a text from my colleague Dan Whitaker, who sent a screenshot with a simple message. Saw this. Thought you should know. It was Naomi's social media, a platform she used mostly for home decor and the occasional dinner photo. The post was a photograph of an empty coffee mug on a windowsill, rain on the glass behind it, the caption carefully composed, "Some seasons strip everything away. Grateful for the people who show up when the person who was supposed to be there just disappears. Healing is non-linear, but it's happening." 46 likes. A string of comments. Sending love, you deserve so much better, we're here for you, from people who had no idea what they were actually supporting. I read it twice. Set my phone down. Picked it up again. I had two options. Ignore it, which was the dignified choice and the one that protected my legal position. Or respond, which was the emotionally satisfying choice and the one that would cost me. I ignored it. What I did instead was send 3 people a document. Not a post, not a public statement. A document, a tidy, factual summary of the timeline, with dates, dollar amounts, and the key fact from Renee's screenshots. No editorializing, no emotional language. Just a record. I sent it to Dan, to my friend Greg Tully from the Industry Association, and to Naomi's cousin Bev, who I knew was one of the people closest to her family and would understand what she was reading. I did not ask them to share it. I did not tell them what to do with it. I simply made sure that the people most likely to hear Naomi's version also had access to mine. Within 24 hours, the comment section on her post had gone quiet. No new supportive messages. A few of the earlier ones deleted. Dan texted me. Bev called me. She's not happy with Naomi. I didn't respond to that one. Naomi called me Sunday night, and her voice when I answered was different. The careful control stripped back, something rawer and sharper underneath. You sent that document to Bev, she said. Not a question. I shared accurate information with a few people. I replied. You're trying to destroy me. I'm trying to make sure the truth is available to people who are being told a story, I said. That's not destruction. That's documentation. She went quiet for a moment. Then, my attorney says you've been thorough. Your attorney is right. Clayton, her voice dropped. Is there anything left here to save? Any part of you that wants to find a way through this? I sat with that question for a full 10 seconds. Not because I was tempted, but because she deserved a real answer. No, I said. There isn't. Not after what I found in that folder. Not after Derek. Not after you let me stand in front of you on that porch and treated me like an inconvenience. I kept my voice level. What I want is for this to be finished cleanly and fairly, and then I want to move forward. That's all I want from you now.
She spent 8 months lying, cheating, spending their money, and then she calls and asks if there's anything left to save. Clayton gave her the most honest answer he could, and honestly, I respect him for it.
She didn't respond. After a moment, the line went quiet. I set the phone down and looked across the living room at Bruno, who had arranged himself in the exact center of the couch with the authority of a dog who has decided that the furniture situation has permanently improved. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. What I felt was something close to clear-headed, the feeling that comes when a long, complicated project finally shows you the path to completion. The path was there. I could see it clearly. I just had to walk it. The call from my mother came on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into the legal process. I was at Owen's kitchen table going through the latest round of documents Patricia had forwarded. A response from Naomi's attorney that was, as Patricia had predicted, considerably less aggressive than the opening position. The financial documentation had done its work. My mother, Irene Merritt, was 68 years old and had lived alone in a house outside Dayton since my father passed 9 years ago. She called me every Sunday without fail, brief and practical. How's the job? How's the weather? How's Bruno? She did not call on Wednesdays. When her name appeared on my screen that evening, I stepped away from the table and answered. Clayton. Her voice was steady, the way it always was, but underneath the steadiness was something careful. Something she'd been carrying for a while. I spoke to Naomi's mother today. Ellen called me. I leaned against the wall. What did she say? Her version of events. A pause. I listened. Then I told her I'd speak to you before forming any opinions. I appreciate that. I've been thinking about what to say to you for 2 days now. Her voice was quiet. I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as your mother, not as someone trying to make things better or worse. Go ahead. She took a breath. I never fully trusted Naomi. From the beginning, there was something in how she looked at you, not with love exactly, but with calculation, like she was measuring the distance between what you were and what she needed you to be. She stopped. I never said anything because you were happy or you seemed happy, and it wasn't my place to plant seeds of doubt in a marriage I hoped I was wrong about. Her voice tightened slightly. I was not wrong, and I'm sorry I stayed quiet. I stood there for a long moment and let that land. Mom, my voice came out lower than I intended. You have nothing to apologize for. I do, she said firmly. You're my son. I saw something, and I said nothing. I don't get to feel clean about that. You're telling me now. Now, it doesn't do much for the last 11 years. It does something for the next 40, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then I heard her exhale, a long, slow breath, like she'd been holding it for a very long time. You sound like your father when you say things like that. I smiled. Couldn't help it. How is that? Infuriatingly reasonable. A pause, and I could hear the thin edge of a smile in her voice. Are you eating properly up there? Bruno and I are managing fine. That dog eats better than you do, and we both know it. She paused again. Clayton, come home for Thanksgiving. Bring Bruno. I'll make the turkey, and you can fix that gutter on the back of the house that's been pulling away from the eaves since September. I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. A real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere uncomplicated. Deal. We talked for another 20 minutes, about nothing important, about everything necessary. When I hung up, Owen was standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 bottles of beer, having had the good sense to stay out of earshot. He handed me one. Good call. Yeah, I said. Good call. The following week, Patricia informed me that Naomi's attorney had accepted the revised settlement terms. The house stayed mine. The joint savings were divided per the documentation of her unauthorized transfers, meaning her share reflected the amount she'd already removed. Her consulting income had been formally disclosed. The process which Naomi had initially positioned as something she would contest vigorously, had deflated with the quiet efficiency of a structure that had lost its load-bearing wall. I signed the final documents on a Thursday morning in Patricia's office. Clear sky outside, the first cold snap of the season frosting the window glass. Patricia slid the papers across her desk one by one, and I signed each with the same pen, unhurried. When it was done, she looked at me with something like professional satisfaction. "You handled this well," she said. "Most people don't come in organized. Most people come in with feelings. You came in with a file." "I manage construction projects," I said. "Everything gets documented." She smiled. "Keep that habit." I walked out of her building and stood on North High Street for a moment, hands in my jacket pockets, the cold air sharp against my face. Bruno was at Owen's. Thanksgiving was 4 days away. The house was mine, legally and completely, and I had a gutter to fix in Dayton. I wasn't celebrating. There was nothing to celebrate in the wreckage of 11 years. But there was something to acknowledge, a foundation cleared of everything false, ready for whatever came next. I drove home and took Bruno for a long run through the neighborhood. He was, as always, completely delighted by this. For months after the papers were signed, I repainted the living room. Not because the old color was wrong, but because I needed the room to be mine in a way that went beyond the deed. I chose a deep gray-green, the color of the Ohio River on a cloudy afternoon, and I spent a Saturday doing it myself. Tape drop cloth, 2 coats, the radio on low. Bruno supervised from his spot by the window with the focused concern of a foreman who has doubts about the crew. The photos came down before the first coat went on. Not thrown away. I'm not built for theatrics, but boxed and put in the attic because they belonged to a version of the house that no longer existed, and I wasn't going to paper over them with new paint. I bought 2 new pieces of art from a local market in the short north, abstract landscapes, things I chose because I liked them and for no other reason. Derek Payne, as it turned out, did not get what he came for. Owen told me in January that Derek and Naomi had ended things, apparently within 6 weeks of everything becoming public. Owen had heard it through a mutual acquaintance who knew someone in Naomi's circle. The story, as it filtered back to me, was that once the glamour of the arrangement dissolved and the legal and social consequences became real, Derek had found the situation considerably less satisfying than whatever revenge fantasy had driven him to it. He'd moved on. Naomi was left with the consequences of her choices and a man who'd used her as a vehicle for a grudge the same way she'd used me as a safety net. I didn't feel satisfaction at that. What I felt was something closer to clarity, the confirmation of what I'd understood the moment I recognized him on that porch. He was never in it for her, and she'd never been honest enough with herself to see it. Naomi had moved to an apartment in a different part of Columbus. Mutual friends reported that she was keeping to herself. I didn't track it closely. She had made her choices and was living with them, which was as it should be. Renee Holloway reached out in February with a brief text. She hoped I was doing well, said she was glad she'd made the call. I thanked her. That was the extent of it. I drove to Dayton for Thanksgiving and Christmas both. Fixed the gutter in November, replaced a section of fence in December. Had 2 long evenings with my mother in her kitchen that felt like the best conversations we'd had in years. She fed Bruno more scraps than she'd ever admit to and pretended not to notice when he slept on the good couch. At work, the Easton mixed-use project came through. I was brought on as construction manager for the commercial build-out, the biggest project Caldwell had given me in years. I was on site every morning by 7, moving through the work with the particular energy that comes when your professional life and your internal life are finally pulling in the same direction. I started running again in March. Long routes through Westerville before sunrise. Just me and the empty streets and whatever was left to process. By April, I was running 5 days a week. I'd lost 12 pounds and slept like I hadn't since my 30s. Owen and I had our usual Thursday drinks. He'd started seeing someone, a woman he'd met through a friend of a friend, and he had the particular sheepishness of a man who doesn't quite know how to be happy without apologizing for it. I told him to stop apologizing. He told me I sounded like a therapist. We argued about the Bengals and had another round. Normal things. Necessary things. One evening in late April, I came home from a long site day, fed Bruno, showered, and walked past the hallway mirror on the way to the kitchen. I stopped. I looked at the man in the mirror for a moment. Older than he was a year ago. A little harder around the jaw, a little steadier in the eyes. Not the man who'd stood on a porch in October with 8 months of lies detonating quietly in his chest. Something different. Something that had come through the fire and found its footing on the other side. I wasn't where I thought I'd be at 44, but I was somewhere real. Bruno appeared at my side, leaned his full weight against my leg, and looked at our reflections with the benign authority of a dog who has decided everything is basically fine. I reached down and scratched his ear. He was right. It basically was.
Clayton didn't explode, didn't beg, didn't fall apart. He did something harder. He stayed calm, stayed focused, and let the truth do the work for him. And in the end, the truth was enough. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that real strength isn't about how loud you can fight back. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to negotiate it away. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.